Let's go to DR Congo now, where the preliminary results announced in Kinshasa faced opposition demands and civil society calls for rerun due to significant logistical issues, casting doubt on the validity of the outcome. The president's victory was followed by businessman Moise Katumbi with 18% and Martin Fayulu with 5%. Nobel Prize winner Denis Mukwege, known for treating victims of sexual violence, received less than 1%. Now, with a turnout of more than 40%, the election saw 18 million people cast their votes. The results are now slated for confirmation by the Constitutional Court, as stated by the election chief, Denis Kadima. Joining me to unwrap all of this is Nixon Katembo, a public affairs analyst from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much for your time, Nixon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now let's get to it. We saw all of the processes and the outcomes that happened during the elections in Congo. Now, what is your assessment of the whole process, and how would you rate the Electoral Commission's performance?
Well, I think in all fairness, we need to look at first and foremost the preparation leading up to these elections, where the Independent Electoral Commissions was chosen by various stakeholders, including the opposition, owing to the composition of the particular Independent Electoral Commission, which have 9 commissioners, 6 of which come from civil society, and then 3 are chosen by a political party, including 1 that is a prerogative either of or the ruling party or the president. So that discussion were engaged among all stakeholders in the country. The second aspect have to be around the issue of voters' roll and registration. Now, the DRC has about 100 million people, of which the voters' roll was engaged after consultation, again, with all stakeholders within the country. And unfortunately for the opposition, for example, they call for a boycott of opposition members not to register in the voters' roll until such a time there has been a change in the Independent Electoral Commission. However, there was a change towards the end of the process where, again, the opposition member called for the participation of their members, whereas it has been too late.
Now
The third aspect.
Okay. Please continue.
The third aspect have to be around the issue of the campaign, the electoral campaign. Now, the electoral campaign happened whereas some opposition have claimed to boycott those elections, saying that the voters' roll has not been audited, and therefore it's not going to be a free and fair, to the extent of not even calling for their members not to field the candidate. Such was the case of Martin Fayulu, including the party of former President Joseph Kabila, the PPRD, and many others. It was surprising, though, that those very same candidates fielded their own name in the last minute, ahead of the last date of the registration of candidate.
All right.
Now the fourth is looking at
Okay,
the opposition.
before you land on the fourth issues, because there are quite a number of concerns. One of the major concerns that, of course, is a contributing factor to the protest and demonstrations we're seeing is the logistical irregularities that was pointed out. Even the election chief did admit that in terms of logistics, it wasn't perfect. And for that reason, eventually we are seeing a result, an outcome that says the president actually did mop up about 70% of the votes. Now, what do you have to say concerning this assertion? The election chief downplayed it, saying that in spite of these logistical irregularities, the votes still represent the will of the people. What's your take?
Well, I think we have to look at in totality what are the real issues that marked the voting process in the DRC, because we cannot choose one aspect over the others. And I guess for the Independent Electoral Commission to have come out with that particular argument, you have to go in past history and look at the geography of the country, which is the size of Western Europe, zero infrastructure. Uh, those are conditions that perhaps could have even lead to some of the challenges that the Independent Electoral Commission faced, including, by the way, the voter education. And I think that plays a part when you have a number of voters who are uneducated, but using some of the latest electronic voting machine system, and therefore delaying even in the process of electing.
Sorry, you said voter education. Is it on the part of the election officials or the voters themselves? Because, I mean, News Central actually did follow that story, and some reports that we got was that even the machines that they were using, you know, some of them really were not, you know, performing optimally, including the cards. Some of it, you know, were faded and all of that. So is it education on the part of the officials or the citizens voting themselves?
I think it's a myriad of issues. I so happen to be present in the eastern city of Goma during the voting process, watching how the elections happen. I had just returned back to Johannesburg, having witnessed those elections. So I understand some of the challenges that some of these voting officials faced, but also the people themselves. I think the turnout in these elections were not what the Independent Electoral Commission prepared for, owing to the challenges that happen in the country. And I think we have to look at this. And one of those issues that if those challenges that happen are not peculiar to the DRC itself, I so happen to cover elections in Zimbabwe, having observed those elections in Zimbabwe and what happened to the extent of postponing those elections in the next day, for a country such as Zimbabwe, which have a better much infrastructure than the DRC. So this is not to say that all was well good in the elections, but also to understand, to underscore some of the critical factors that played a role in some of the reports that you have had from various sources in the DRC. And I guess this cannot discount the fact that Congolese went out of the 44 million voters that are registered as voters. 18 of them voted, and their will have come out. Whether this is the true reflection of what happened, transpired at the ballot, I think the opposition have to come up and use the democratic channels or the legal channels that are within the framework of the constitution of the DRC, including the Independent Electoral Commissions Act, to challenge whatever outcomes that have been declared by the Independent Electoral Commission.
Okay, of course, I'll get back to you, Nixon. Right now, of course, we are joined by Gedeon Beleke, Congolese public affairs analyst, joining on the program right now. Thank you so much for your time, Gedeon.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now, let me start off with you, Gedeon. The call by the opposition, you know, for demonstrations and protests and responding to the election outcome. For you, is that the way to go, or could there have been a better alternative?
I mean, that's the only remaining option the opposition has. Remember, if we talk about the Constitutional Court, that is led by someone that was nominated by Felix Tshisekedi, So the opposition don't have any other option. Unfortunately, what has happened DRC is a totally mere strategic political mechanism that was put in place by Mr. Tshisekedi. So he was underestimated by his opponent, and he put in place the whole political strategy to, impose himself as a leader with the hands of crony.
Now, looking at the election itself, in terms of the process, let's talk about the logistical irregularities that even the election chief did point out. I mean, you are in Congo, you were part of the process, and you saw things firsthand. In terms of these irregularities, is it enough for the election chief to say, in spite of it, the will of the people was what was reflected, as the eventual outcome of the elections?
I mean, there's not any basis on the on the results we have right now as a election result in the DRC. Everything was violated publicly. So if we were in a country that respect the rule of law, these elections could have been, they could have been cancelled. Why am I saying so? The voting was supposed to be held for 11 hours, according to the electoral law. They end up extending the vote for more than 7 days, So that's already a total violation of the law. It's not just a total violation of the law, but it creates a conflictual aspect around
But won't you also want to say, in order to capture as many people, as possible, hence the reason for the extension?
No, yeah, the problem is not to catch as many people. The problem is to have impartial, elections where people are able to vote, and they actually have to know that the votes are supposed to be held for 11 hours. If they didn't have all the logistics, as they claim to, to have not been having, if they didn't have all the logistics in place, they should have at least, call all the leaders and ask them for a few more days so that they can dispatch all their materials correctly and organize elections while respecting the constitutions. But going again throughout the elections and exceeding the hours of elections, where we actually had cases where some individual had the voting machine in their own house, some people from the Tshisekedi's regime that had the electronic voting machines at their residence voting for themselves and so on. So these were just fraudulent elections. Where have you ever seen in the world where elections are supposed to be held for 11 hours, they end up being held for 7 days? Where have you ever seen an election in the world where people are going to the voting station? The electoral law says that they need to have as well the manual copy of the vote. But people end up proclaiming elections without actually having the actual manual paper of the votes. So everything was electronic. So the only person who knows.
All right, Gedeon, because we're pressed for time, I'd like to, of course, just take Nixon's, of course, opinion on this. Are there any takeaways from these elections that happened in DR Congo?
I think one of the things we have to look at the governance of the entire infrastructure of the electoral system in the DRC. I think for me, that is the biggest takeaway from these elections, that the preparation of the election in the DRC is a daunting task, given the geographical landscape of the country, but the absence of infrastructure. The second aspect is around the political trade-off between political parties and how they prepare the elections. I mean, for example, for the opposition, they were here in Johannesburg, where I'm here 3 weeks before the elections, trying to find a common candidate. And I think through this process, it's when the incumbent president outwitted the opposition to get where today. The third takeaway from this is the messaging of the electoral campaign themselves. I struggle to get a clear agenda from both candidates, including the current president, who only one aspect of which the Congolese perhaps were yearning for is the issue of security, by pointing President Paul Kagame as a being source of instability in the East. And I think that messaging quite went well. But other than that, there was no clear candidates plan for the country. And for me, that is a challenge. When you have a country such as the DRC facing institutional challenges, the lack of institutional framework, is institution of the state that function towards the development of the country, and even the mere respect of the constitution. Those are issues that are going to be facing this country, and that those are critical takeaway to be looked at in any discussions that is going to come forward relating to the issues of electoral management in the DRC.
All right, gentlemen, Nixon Katumbi, and of course, a public affairs analyst from Johannesburg, and Gedeon Beleke, Congolese public affairs analyst. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.